Good evening. It's around 7 o'clock in Southern California, and around the world it's different times, but it's never a perfect time to discuss difficult subjects. So we're going to do that tonight. My name is Roland Takaoka, and my niece Trinette Hackett is the main spokesperson of this show, and she's going to tell from her own living experience exactly what stomping on eggshells is all about. And this evening, she's dealing with a specific subject, in which you may have gotten the gist of by reading the title of this event on the event page. It was rather misleading, but she's going to clear up the misleading part and explain why it is a nightmare that it is. And with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Trinette Hackett, and she's going to explain her case this evening. Go ahead, Trinette.
Thank you, Roland. I actually I have a perverse need to raise eyebrows sometimes, and I specifically wrote the title "Raising a Walking, Breathing Nightmare," or "Breathing, Walking Nightmare," rather. And I realized it was going to make some people think, "Gosh, this is a horrible mother that's going to put out that raising a kid is a nightmare." I don't mean that at all. I think raising any kid, no matter what, if they're gifted, anything is difficult. I'm not an expert in it. I only have personally one child. And basically what I was alluding to was when you are a survivor and you realize how prevalent, how realistic it is that your children will come into contact with predators when 90% of the victims know they're predators. So that's a very much smaller group. It's not going to be some guy in a ski mask probably coming up to your kid. It's going to be someone that your kid goes to school with, or one of their friends' parents, or some kind of authority in their life, and that, or a family member. And that is a very, very terrifying thing to come to terms with. And it's very hard to discuss this at all without turning this into a witch hunt, and saying people should turn their families inside out. I am not suggesting that. I don't actually know what the real answer is. I do know that when I was 19 and I realized I was pregnant, this is not something I expected at all. I was not emotionally, financially, or in any way beyond physically prepared to have a child. That was something that kind of created an upheaval in my family. And it during that time before and after my daughter was born, I had her when I was 20. One thing stuck in my mind that my mother told me. She said, being a parent means you have to be worthy of emulation. And basically, if the kids copied you, that would be a good thing. And I don't know how often I've lived up to that. I can't honestly say that I've always done the right thing, but I've tried to be someone who was honest and hardworking. And, being this role model, I think that every parent aspires to be, and you have certain dreams and wishes and prayers for your children. You want them to do well in school. You want them to have friends. You want them to be successful in their business or their job. And you want them to have a decent self-image of themselves. And in pursuing this, you are trying to remind them of what society expects of them. And I'm a little calmer this time because I've been battling a cold for the last week. So if I get too excited like I normally do, I'm just going to start coughing, and no one really needs to hear that. Just because I decided to make my body a guinea pig for the latest, cold virus that swept through the lower part of California. That's of no interest right now. Trying to instill this in your children, and you want them to have manners. You want them to learn how to be fair, to other people. You tell them, I know that I've constantly told any kid that was in my charge, you need to respect adults. You need to listen to adults. Don't argue with them. Don't be rude with them. And at the same point, as a survivor, I'm always wondering, where do I hit the cutoff point where I tell them, but listen, if a grown-up does this, they're not on the same list of people you respect and that you need to listen to. If a grown-up tells you to keep a secret from someone, from your parents, from other grown-ups, that's a bad thing. Unless it's something like we're going to do a surprise party for them, that's a really bad thing. And at the same point, it's like, my dad never told me to keep this secret. He never had to. He let the silence and the confusion and the guilt work for me and just let my mind as a child fill in the blanks. So it's a paradox where you want your child to be raised where they do respect the boundaries and the authority of grown-ups. And yet at the same point, it's like, how do I keep my kid safe? How the hell can I keep my kid safe? Because if this is true and all these statistics are true, this is someone who's going to hurt my kid that I trust. And that doesn't mean that every kid's going to be hurt. But am I just going to sit there and cross my fingers and be like, well, maybe I'm going to be like the 2 out of 3 parents that don't have to live through this nightmare? So this is a nightmare. And when my daughter was 4.5, she was diagnosed autistic. And that is a neural, and just to throw it out there, okay, I don't have a personal problem if someone says my daughter is autistic, has autism, experiences autism, whatever. So some parents get very defensive if you say your kid is autistic. I personally don't care one way or another. But when I found out that my daughter was autistic and she was low to mid functioning, and I realized that she would, for a great portion of her life, if not her entire life, be on the most part of nonverbal, sometimes emotionally younger than she is, and she has the innocence perpetually of a child. That filled me with absolute terror for more reason than one. Number one is all these wants that I have for her had to be custom tailored to certain expectations that she would be able to fulfill for herself. Ways that I expected to be a mother had to be changed in order to suit her. And I was unprepared for this. And the realization that a child that would have a great deal of difficulty entering into a conversation where she could identify what had happened in a past experience, even a recent past experience in detail, or to even start that kind of a conversation with somebody, made her the perfect victim. That made her the absolute perfect victim because it would maybe never even occur to her to ever point a finger. And that terrified me. That terrified me because right around the same time, she had developed a cold, and I sat up all night staring at her. And I think any parent has done this, where your kid's sick or even they're not sick. You just stare at them. And every once in a while, you poke them to make sure they're still breathing. Or you hold a finger under their nose, anything, any one of those crazy things you do as a parent. And I realized something, and I called up my mom out of nowhere. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I called her a bunch of funny names that I'm not going to repeat here because they're rude. And I said, you didn't tell me that you never stop worrying. And even now, my mom hasn't stopped worrying about me, and I'm never going to stop worrying about my kids. I mean, we could be 50 and she's still going to be worrying about us. And the point is that anyone who loves their child at all is going to have to come to terms with the ugly, mind-wrenching realization that they have to be more aware of the people associating with their children. They have to. I'm not saying point fingers at everyone and light torches and grab pitchforks, but I'm saying you have to be aware that so many of these people who talk, who finally open up, these are men and women that they know. This is not a stranger. This is not someone who walked in the street and they didn't know their name and they never heard from them again. These are people that you know and you are friends with and you trust and you love. And that's a scary thing. That's a scary thing because you're used to circling the wagons, and maybe they're part of the wagons that you circle with, and they're supposed to be someone that you can trust with the life and the well-being of your child. And my dad was a very likable person. I'm assuming he still is. We were lower middle class, okay? We lived in an established neighborhood. We went to church. I had a stay-at-home mom. I had a father with a degree. Both sets of my grandparents were alive and involved. I had good schooling. I was happy. I was not a latchkey kid. I was not left alone for hours at a time. This was back in the 80s. I mean, these are all the reasons why technically I shouldn't have been a target for this, It's like, oh, well, if the parents are alcoholics or if the mother works away from home, they had all these different reasons why to blame. And all these reasons, all these factors should have been technically, according to 80s therapy, why I shouldn't have been a target. My parents weren't divorced at the time. We went to church. I had a big extended family that loved me. Hopefully still loves me, But I mean, that didn't keep me safe. That didn't keep me safe. And my mom spent all this time with me. And it's still, that in itself was not a barrier from this. And that was very hard for my family to accept. And another thing about having to have a little higher standard for your children. I have had strangers that I have met, like that hour, the second time I've seen them, they've seen where I've worked, or they realize I'm married, or that I have a kid, or I don't work out of the house. And they have asked me, this virtual stranger, to babysit. Now, I'm just going to say this bluntly, you are stark raving insane. Okay, this doesn't mean that I am incapable of watching your child. This doesn't even mean that I don't want to watch your child. You don't know me. Just because I have a kid, or I have a husband, or I have a home, or maybe because I stay at home you think I have nothing better to do. These are not parameters for what makes a safe person to watch your child. My husband on the East Coast, he was at the playground with our kid. And some random other mother asked him out of the blue, it's like, hey, can you watch my son because I have to go home for a minute? And she was going to get in her car and she was going to leave. And I understand. My husband is a very decent, upstanding guy. He doesn't look like a psychopath. That's still really scary that you would ask a perfectly strange man or woman to keep an eye on your kid while you left the premises in your car and you just took off, This is, what are you basing what your kid is safe with? Just because they're not hiding behind a brick wall, cackling, they're not like twisting a little, crooked mustache. Whatever you're basing what your kids are safe with, you need to really evaluate that, okay? Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that I'm going to run around beating and molesting children, okay? Far from it. But usually the people who have asked me do not know me well enough as a person to offer that, or to offer me their children. And that's terrifying. I have had to be I can count on less than 2 hands across this country who I'll allow to watch my daughter. And most of it's family, okay? But the thing is that every single one of them has to understand my daughter is not going to say if you hurt her. So I need to make damn sure that you're not just going to watch her. You're going to protect her. And that's a higher level of responsibility than we normally expect from babysitters. You expect them to sit on the couch and eat pizza and stay on the phone with their friends or their boyfriend. And in reality, I'm not saying that parents don't deserve a night out. I know I could sure use one once in a while. But you have to be a little pickier. You have to be a little pickier because this is the person that literally for several hours holds your child in their hands. And whatever happens is kind of what they say or what they don't say. That being said, I'm not saying that babysitters are, going to randomly run around and molest your children. It's not just babysitters. It's friends of the family and other parts of the family members. You need to be a little pickier. You need to really, I don't have the answer. I don't have the formula for that. You really need to look at who you're leaving your children with. Because are you sure you know what they would do if your kids were too afraid to say anything? you know? And people ask, well, how do you make sure that your kids are able to talk with you? I know that my mom spent a great deal of time letting me know that if someone touched me or someone scared me, that I needed to tell somebody. She didn't wait for school to start saying those, you know, those mantras to me. She let me know very early on that if someone did it, I think the problem that confused me the most, and it's not her fault, we never covered that it could be someone I know. We never went over that because you're not supposed to have to factor in. Well, it's like, well, if your father decides to come in and do this to you, that's not, you know, that's not something you want to tell your kid. Okay, can you imagine the panic you would actually have? And I almost don't know what to say at this point, because there is the realization that nothing I do, unless I lock my daughter in a cabinet and stare at her for the rest of eternity, there is nothing I do, as long as I let her go out into that world, that is going to keep her 100% safe. And I've talked with other survivors about this. Some of them refuse to have children. Refuse because it seems like we're just fattening them up for the slaughter. Some of them don't think that they would be able to protect their children. And I don't have the answer to that. And sometimes it feels completely irresponsible as a grown-up and as a mother to know that I do not have a guarantee unless I deny her regular life of going out, going to school, not breathing over her shoulder every spare second. And it just feels really irresponsible sometimes, because that's something you're supposed to be able to promise, right? You're supposed to be able to promise your kid you'll take care of them, you'll watch over them, you'll do all this for them.
Let me jump in for a moment, and I'll just give you a chance to breathe a little. First of all, my sister Janet, Trinette's mother, is out in the audience watching the show, and I'm really proud of the fact that you're here. It means a lot. Also, Stephen Hackett, who is Trinette's husband, is also out there, and he's talking. Did you? I might have missed it because I was following the comments in the stream. But did you actually tell the story of the lady in the park?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I got to hear it before the show started, so I was okay to miss it and the thing. But that's a great story, and I wanted to make the mention that Janet Malding, who is your mother, Trinette. Well, you know that, didn't you? Anyway, Janet is out there, and she says this little statement here. I am so proud of my courageous daughter. I am here and no longer living in silent desperation. And that's just a great declaration in support of Trinette. And I'm really proud that you're here. Thanks, Janet. So you've got a support group that's pretty good. And in spite of it all, it's like we can only do so much. When I think about it, I had 3 girls, 3 in a row. Okay, guys, imagine that. If you don't have any kids, maybe you want to consider this and maybe see how dingy I am and say, maybe I don't want to end up like that guy. But I had one, I'm kidding, of course. I had one daughter, and she was still in the cradle, a few weeks old. And I can remember bringing her home and setting her in the cradle and just observing her for a while, and then going back and reading a book or watching TV for a while. And then in no time at all, I had to go back and see if she was still breathing. I was constantly worried that she would just stop breathing. Who knows? Who knows why? But we have these things happen to kids at any time. So how can we go beyond that and watch them grow up, move into the world with other people where they're out of our control, and even keep sanity? How do we do that? It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I wish I had the answer for that, Roland. I know that one of the things that I've I've come into contact, and I think it was a bigger issue for my age bracket, because my age bracket started to branch away from the idea of traditional idea of ladylike behavior. And I was a perfect example of that for most of my life. But one of the things that I have encouraged my daughter and my stepdaughter is that I wanted them to understand that there are going to be times in life when people would try to exert their will on them. And especially women, okay, especially girls, they're kind of socially pressured to not really raise a fuss, you know? If you speak out, if you act out, if you're too opinionated, you're labeled the B word. And I've been called that many times. But that aside, the hardest thing is to let them know that it's not necessarily considered socially feminine to know what you want and to say what you want. But I think it's important. I think it's important for girls to learn that they need to have that voice at an early age. And maybe a little less emphasis on ladylike, be quiet, don't say anything, don't complain. I know that we always tell our kids, stop complaining, stop being rude. I can't remember how many times I've been at parks, I've been in stores, restaurants, and a kid's starting to say something, and the mother or father's like, I don't even want to hear it. And I'm not saying that kid necessarily had something monumental to tell. But when you shut your kid down like that, you lose future chances of knowing that they will trust you enough to come forward. And granted, okay, I remember being a kid. 3/4 of what I had to say probably didn't matter squat. You know, I understand that. There were, even as much as my mom encouraged me to talk, and that was something that actually this morning I called her out of the blue, which I do most mornings. I just call her. I don't call to see if she's eaten or if she's awake or dressed or anything. I just straight up call her. And we kind of have this routine where every morning I bug her and I'm in her ear as she gets ready and eats and does her hair. And she is one of my best friends in the whole wide world. And part of the reason is because she has put up with me through all of this when I didn't even want to put up with myself. And I asked her, I said, do you have a minute? Because, you know, sometimes she actually has stuff she has to do. And she's like, yeah, what's up? And I asked her, I said, I need to talk to you. What was it like raising me after you found out? And we have a very, very open conversation. We talk about just about everything. And she was really quiet for a second. She goes, okay. It was hell. It was hell. I talked to everyone I could. I talked to every therapist I could get my hands on, all of my friends, everyone in the family, and I felt powerless. And she said, I lived in a state of silent desperation constantly. She goes, I didn't know where my daughter had gone. She said, I didn't know how to reach you, how to help you. I didn't know how to be available to you. Now, mind you, during this time that I was going out of my mind, because at that point I put up a block on almost everything that had happened to me except for 1 or 2 moments. During this time, my mom was putting herself through college and graduating with highest honors, and never got below an A in any class. And when she started, she was terrified and she didn't think she could do it. But her biggest goal at that point was to be independent so that we never needed his money and his help. And she would never feel powerless to help her children again. So during this time, actually, my favorite semester was when she was taking 22 units. Now, if you say 22 and units and mean college, you realize this is a recipe for disaster. She was probably averaging 2.5 hours of sleep a night. And spending most of her time either in class or meeting people to study. or, falling asleep on her desk trying to study some more. And I was desperate for her attention, and yet every time I got it, I threw it back in her face. Every time I said, I need to talk to you. And then she'd be like, okay, fine, I'll make the time, let's talk. And I would go round and round and round and round. And then she'd be like, I have to sleep, or I have to eat, or we have to go to school, or I have to study. And I would blow up at her again because I felt like I was being pushed away. I was unable to overcome that block. And this was with a woman that I trust implicitly, okay? So I'm telling you right now, for people that are trying to handle your personal survivor in your family, they're going to push you away as hard as they can and as violently as they can. I think the worst thing I ever told her, because she was being a parent and trying to give me, boundaries, I told her that I hated her and I wanted to go live with my dad. And she took it like a champ. She looked at me and she goes, well, you can't because the courts won't let you. And it took me several years to realize how deep of a knife thrust that must have been. I mean, that was a pretty big FU. And that was all because she loved me, and the mean lady did not want to let me go unchaperoned to a bunch of high school people drinking. Horrible person, right? I think most of my high school years with her were simply her leaning over the edge of a tall building, holding onto my wrist. And I was prying her fingers off as hard as I could. I wanted her to let me go. I did not want to accept anything that had happened. I did not want to live in a world where the rules only applied to me. I have to tell the truth. I have to do the right thing. I have to be a good person. And yet I see everyone else getting away with it. And my mom just kept standing there and saying, I understand that. I am sorry this has happened. But you have to go to school. You have to live. You have to shower. You have to keep going. And I'll tell you, for about 3 or 4 years, I hated her for it. I hated her for making me live, making me adhere to rules that good people do, that honest, hardworking people do. I hated it. I just wanted to just be cast free to the wind. I did not want it to count. I did not care what happened to me. And she's just like, well, I'm sorry. You just telling me not to care about you anymore. It's not going to happen. And I know that she spent hours wondering what she did wrong. What she did wrong. And let me tell you, okay, if the therapist didn't peg it and the rest of my highly protective family didn't peg it, okay, no one saw this, okay? No one saw it. It was happening to me, and I didn't see it. And as often as I've gone into therapy, trying to deal with what happened to me and how it affected me, this sounds really selfish. It never occurred to me that my mom was spending the same amount of years blaming herself that it didn't happen, or that she couldn't have stopped it from happening. So it's like this ripple effect where it's hit so many people. This interaction between two human beings has created this snowball effect that this rocked this family. Actually, it split this entire family in half, pretty much, just about. We've got my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family. All because my dad didn't want to follow the rules. And instead of him sitting here wondering, where did I go wrong? How do I be a better person? It's the rest of us left in the wake. It's the rest of us. And my mom stood there and took every harsh word every time I got into the car and said I hated her, every time I screamed at her, every time. There was actually a really stupid part where in senior year, because I was doing so well, she was just like, you know what, on Friday and Saturday, I trust you. You don't have a curfew. Come home when you need to. Okay, I was 17 years old and I threw the biggest fit because I thought that meant she didn't love me. So I screamed at her until she gave me a curfew. And afterwards, all my friends said that I was the biggest moron alive, because you're like, you had no curfew? Not even like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock? It's like, no, Mom said that as long as I knew what I was doing and I was with people that she knew, I could stay as long as I wanted. And that freaked me out, because after so many years of you will come home at this time and you will not go out and date and you will not hang out with your friends and I will always know where you are at all times, which is kind of hard when you realize that pagers and cell phones weren't really affordable then. Like drug dealers had pagers, okay? So you didn't have a pager unless you were a drug dealer, unless you were a CEO of some company. So you had to always be by a payphone. And then she was just like, I trust you. You're being great. So she rewarded me with every teenager's dream. And I kind of threw it back in her face. So she's just like, what am I doing wrong? I am trying to give you love. I am trying to give you, everything that I know how to do. And you are running from me. And I know that every teenager at some point or another runs like hell from their parents. I didn't trust adults. Because from a very young age, I think all of you remember this. There's a certain point when you realize it's us against the grown-ups, right? It's us against the grown-ups. And for the longest time, I could not understand why a faction, however half the world, could hurt me and at the same time want to help me. I could not differentiate my father from every other grown-up.
It's very interesting dynamics that are going on within the family as a result of the experience. But I wanted to back up some to something that Stephen mentioned, because this was a very astute comment. And although it backs up the conversation significantly, wanted to go there because he says something that we all should know and we all should consider when the people around of us are telling things that are important, and we should take the time to listen. It's a very simple lesson. He says, too many times we shut people down, not just children who are desperately trying to say something. And are we so busy in our lives that we can't take a moment to listen for a moment to someone other than our internal dialogues? And this statement is indicative of the fact that we get so busy and life gets so hectic and we're caught up with our own stuff so much that we can't take the time to listen to people. So I'm with you, Steve. This is something that needs to be highlighted as well as everything else. But this concept, again, to come back to the family dynamics, there's no manual. There's no way to know exactly what people are thinking or how to say something to somebody so they'll understand not just the words that you're speaking, but your intention behind the words. And at that point, when you've had such a dramatic crack in the system of what's going on, it's hard to say what is going to make sense, what is going to not make sense, and what people mean. And it's all going to be misinterpreted. So it's like such a dynamically broken thing, and it happens all the time. So we have to pay special attention and try extra hard. And that's what you both did. And lo and behold, you both came out of it in your own time. It all worked out to a point where you're now talking, processing, and we're still a loving family. But
Yeah.
these things take time. They really do.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, and this was something that I actually had to deal with several times. Before, of course, I found Stephen again. I was a single mom for about 6.5 years. Okay. Well, I was in a relationship for several of those years, but we can just call it being a single mom because the parenting was kind of one-sided. But given in this day and age, a single mother is not actually as uncommon as it was, 40, 50 years ago. And it's not usually looked on with the stigma that it was a generation ago. And one of the things I was always terrified was, okay, yeah, you get lonely. Okay, yeah, you date. Do not parade a bunch of people past your child. I can't stress that heavily enough. I had my interludes as a single mother. Yeah, one of them met my daughter. once, and I had seen him for a year. I was very careful that I did not want her getting used to a whole bunch of Uncle So-and-sos. And that doesn't mean that single parents are not entitled to a life, that they are not entitled to companionship. By all means, please be safe, use your brain. But I mean, I kept it apart from my child. And I know a lot of guys, and I don't know if this is because they realized it was a really good carrot. They're like, when am I going to meet your kid? I love your kid. And it's like, I know you'll love my kid. My kid is lovable. Kids are adorable, You're not going to meet my kid unless I know you're going to be around for a while, because when we break up, I don't want to explain every 3 weeks why some guy that she met is never going to come back. That's not fair. That is not fair to a kid. And the thing is that they either learn to be extremely detached from the people that they meet, or to cling desperately. And either one of those is dangerous. Now, the second one is even more dangerous, because if they are desperate to have that person stay, what are they going to do to make that person stay? Now, that goes for both the mom and the kid, Don't be so lonely that you're going to settle just so you don't be alone. I picked a couple of bad apples before I looked out with a prince. And some of those I really should have put a little higher price tag on my self-worth. But it took me several years to get myself off the bargain rack. And actually, I remember it was my husband's ex-wife when she started dating, and they had a little girl. And one of her boyfriends began giving his daughter jewelry. And I don't mean like the bubble gum rings. Jewelry. And that really makes you, it didn't make her sit up and take notice, but it made him. He's like, why is someone giving a 2-year-old gold jewelry? Why would you give something that expensive to a child, practically an infant? Why are you paying that much attention to a child? These are things you have to be aware of, because if you're a single parent, they're going to try to get in with your kid, because that's what makes your heart melt, That's what makes you go, oh, wow, I can see us being a family. Well, that's like insta scary notion. Just add water and you've got this perfect scenario of the single parent that is so desperate to make the family nucleus again that they might even accept someone that is not in their best interest. Of course, you want to make sure that the person works out well with your kid. There's a level where it becomes creepy. There really is. I think most of us as parents have been somewhere. Restaurant, grocery store, gas station. And you see someone looking at your kid. Usually it's a daughter, okay? I've had this. I know my mom has had this. I'm sure my uncle's had this. And you realize someone is staring at your kid. And this is not the, oh, this is a very cute little girl. This is a very pretty little girl. She's going to be a beautiful woman when she grows up. They're looking at this kid the way a normal man looks at a bunch of 21-year-olds wandering by in miniskirts. And it raises every hair on your arms and your back. And they lock gazes with you and realize you're looking at them, and they make themselves scarce. And there's a part of you that actually wants to chase this perfect stranger down. You want to chase him down, you want to beat the crap out of him, and all they did was look at your kid. And you know the look I'm talking about. It's not the look like, oh, it's a 17-year-old nearly illegal. This is someone looking at a child. You have seen these people before in normal public situations staring at children, and you can't do anything about it. There is no law that will protect me going and running down a grocery store aisle and beating the crap out of a guy who stared at my daughter for 30 seconds because he was looking at her like a piece of freaking cheesecake. There is no law that will protect me from that. And yet, that's where you are. And yet, if you see that in a public area, why are you unwilling to admit that it is prevalent? Why are you unwilling to admit that they are circling kids? They're circling them like sharks. And these people, they do their best. They survive by not looking like creepers. They look harmless. They look helpful. They act like real people. They really do, okay? And you would argue that biologically they are people. I think down to DNA, yes, they are. At the same point, I think they have learned to camouflage to an extent that we will befriend them, we will employ them, we will marry them, we will live with them. And I know that my mom spent a long time feeling horrified that she married my father. It's not your fault, Mom. Okay? I think I need to say this. This isn't your fault. It is not your fault that you are not a jaded, suspicious, crazy person who's going to assume the worst in everyone. That is not your responsibility to sniff out evil as it is. That's not. What it is Dad failed his responsibility to you and to me. Okay, and I just needed to say that where not just you and I can hear.
To more than that, he really failed a lot more than just his own family.
Oh, yeah.
He's
Try to keep the list small.
No, let's go ahead and tell it like it is. When we have a few good guys out there trying to be good humans and good fathers, he's the poorest example possible. And to be alongside him, where he is totally unrecognizable for what he is, and to be alongside him thinking, hey, let's a chum buddy grab a soda together, play a card game or a game of chess or something, or play a video game, talk about things lightly like nothing is going on, and then to realize that there's more going on than meets the eye, and that's just an atrocity that I would not ever allow happen to my own daughters if I knew better. And that's, then the question being, how would you ever know? How would you ever know? And with someone like who we're talking about, he was totally non-suspicious, totally just passive. You couldn't imagine that he was what he was, what he is. It's beyond concept. And yet, there he is. It's just impossible to know.
And I wish I had an answer for that because, and my mom has asked before and other people have asked before, how do we protect our kids? And it's like, okay, well, the standard thing, stay in communication with your kids. That's funny because Mom was in nearly constant communication with me. Usually whether she wanted to be in communication with me or not, I was talking her ear off constantly. And she always spent time with us. It's not like she was absent. It's not like she was missing. She was there so much of the time. Yeah, she spent some time away from us to go see my aunt, to go see some friends. But she wasn't gone every day. It's not like she wasn't available to me. And I always felt that she was available to me. And that I know that's not an answer because she's just like, but what could I have done? It's like, I didn't even see it coming. I could not comprehend that my gentle, intelligent, joking father who could show me how to build a mission at a foam board, who could show me how to play that tree frisbee game, where it's kind of like tagging with a frisbee on the park. The person that could show me how to paint a miniature and can teach me songs and tell me stories. I could not link that with the same person that would come to my bedroom at night and have the blankest, soulless stare. I did not understand how that was my father. He wore my father's skin, but he wasn't there. And I didn't know how to tell you that this was going on because it's almost like it wasn't real. This should not happen. This should not happen, yet it is happening. This should be the man that protects me, and yet he's not. These are opposites that a child's mind has a very hard time understanding. And that was something that I could not process, so I didn't. If anyone asked me back then, what's your dad like? It's like, oh, he's really smart, he's really funny, he likes computer games, he likes the computer. That's it. He was Dad. And as immature as he was, he did not come across as a threat. He didn't bully us. He didn't beat us. You know, he didn't harass us and call us names. He seemed like a very unassuming, gentle person. And it's been my experience that a lot of these men that do this, they come across as wouldn't hurt a fly, wouldn't kick a puppy, you know. And I wish there was a radar. I really do wish there was a radar for this, and I don't have it. And let me tell you, it pisses me off because I have a little girl that, if it ever happened to her, might never tell me why she cries at night. And that's, let me tell you, that's something that's put Pepto-Bismol on one of the highest expenses sometimes on my grocery list, where I'll pop Rolaids like they're breath mints. And just, antacid farm, just trying to, people say, well, you can't do anything about it. Don't think about it. How can you not think about this? How can you not let this overwhelm you at times? I don't have a way to protect my daughter from everything. And the lack of an explanation, the lack of, I can pray, I can hire bodyguards, I can do all the only way that I can is to not give her a life. I can put her in a bubble, and I could shove food and books and clothes and toiletries under the door. That is the way I can keep her safe. And that's not a life. Plus, it's not legal. Plus, who the heck would want it for anybody? So the only way that I can offer her any kind of a happiness is to realize that she is in danger. And that's with anyone, any child that I will have, any person that I have come to love, is that I can't protect them. All I can do is maybe pick up the pieces afterwards, which isn't a very inspiring thought. It's not a very comforting thought. I want people, I want you to take a more active role in protecting your child and less of a passive one. And if people think that you are a little more paranoid and maybe it's just too much for the little beatnik attitude, good, because no one is going to protect your child as rabidly as you are. No one.
That's quite a message you're delivering tonight, Trinette. And I have to commend you on your ability. The word mentioned by a couple of us in the comment stream is courageous. Courage is something that cannot be measured accurately. It's hard to know, and it's hard to recognize when you're actually in need of it. But I can definitely tell when I see it. And you are being courageous to be able to speak the story, to talk about it, to bring it out, and to eloquently express how you think about it and what the experience was all about. And your ability to tell the actual story that happened and the way you tell it and the information you're delivering is very, very powerful. It's really strong because it gets down to the essence of what's really happening that people are experiencing. And although they may be experiencing and totally be able to relate to what you're describing here and the different situations and growing up from that point and then having their own children and knowing what you're talking about now and thinking, oh my God, I'm experiencing that now. Or, my God, I've never actually thought about it quite that way. Or, like, I can never get it out of my mind that the same thing could happen to my kids. There's a lot of aspects to this. But the people are out there dealing with the concept, dealing with the reality of what their experience was, and they think that they're all alone, and they are not. So, yes, we have to hold up the flag and the banner of what you're speaking of, and actually get the conversation going more, and get people talking about it, just so that it's more prevalent in our consciousness. Because the actual statistics are not acceptable. None of this is acceptable, but the statistics are so horrible that we know we've got to do something about it now. We really do.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me that break. I needed that. This is probably the most melancholy segment I've done, and it's because I don't have a guarantee. I don't have an answer. I'd give it to everyone free if I could. But I don't have a magic wand to wave over people to find out if they're safe or not, because you know what? A lot of the people that aren't safe for your kids don't believe that they're a danger. You know, my dad didn't wander around thinking he shouldn't be around me. He doesn't understand why I don't want anything more to do with him. He doesn't understand why even admitting to a single instance of incestuous molestation, that he should be condemned, he should be looked down upon, he should be labeled. He actually doesn't understand that. Okay, so what you are dealing with, what you are trying to protect your children from, are usually highly intelligent, likable, to some extent charming grown-ups who don't see what they're doing as monstrous. They don't even factor that in. That's what they want to do. And they don't see why they should be stopped from doing what they want to do. And when they're caught, they're only sorry that they got caught. They're not sorry that they are leaving destruction in their wake. And I think that's what completely pisses me off, is that I will never be able to get ahead of the stream. Nothing like, cops, CPS workers, all of this. No one is going to be able to get ahead of the tide. All they can do is pick up the pieces. And that's like a fireman constantly coming in after the last flames flicker out. You just hope there's stuff to scrape up afterwards, but it's not. These aren't books and furniture and paintings. These are people. These are human beings. And it's a lot harder to put them together. And I know that my mom didn't give up. And okay, Mom, I hated you at the time for not giving up on me, okay? I really did, and I thought that you were out of your mind, because I did not want to accept that I could be worth something at that point, because I felt so used and cast aside and tainted, like I was never gonna be good. Like I was never gonna be clean, like I was never gonna deserve anything that wasn't already broken. And I hated that you told me that I could, that I was worth something, that I was wonderful, that I was beautiful, that I was smart, that I was going to go somewhere and be somebody and be happy. That was so terrifying to consider, because it was against everything that I had taught myself, everything I understood. And I tried really hard to make you hate me. I really did, because I could not face my crap. I could not face this, to be very dramatically, poetic. I could not face the yawning chasm that I stared into every time I started circling what had happened to me. And I couldn't bring you there, and I couldn't share it with you, and I couldn't face it. So instead, I just wanted someone else to hurt as much as I was hurting. And you wouldn't leave. So you were it. You were it. You were my test subject, and it didn't make you give up on me, and it didn't make you leave, and that was so confusing, because I hated me. I hated everything, and no matter what I did to you, I stole your clothes. I vandalized your clothes. I buried your jewelry. I was eating food and leaving it in weird places in the house. I was stealing from you. I was stealing money from you. I was destroying furniture. I was leaving out of the window at the oddest hours of the night. You didn't know where I was going. I was doing everything I could to make you go away from me, and you didn't. And I did not understand what that meant back then, okay? I was 15, 16, 17. I figured you were too stupid to understand. that you were supposed to hate me and you were supposed to let me go. And I'm glad you didn't, okay? Because as many mistakes as I have made, I think if you had let me go, I don't think I would have been alive to make those mistakes. Because as long as one person held me accountable for my life right then, I couldn't completely give up. I couldn't completely give up because I knew you were expecting me to somehow succeed. So that's because of you, Mom.
So did you hear how good you did, Mom? It's good stuff. Thank you, Trinette.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jan, for being in the audience. We've got mother and daughter connected here. And I'm really well aware of the fact that that's not going to happen very often, especially on a subject like this. I mean, not just the two of you, but I mean in general in the world.
Yeah.
People are not talking, and people are not holding on to the relationships. And as you said before, people didn't give up. Well, on top of that, you didn't give up on yourself. You thought you did. You caused yourself a lot of pain, maybe in places, and so forth, processing and making some lesser decisions. But here you are, and you're doing great, which is a miracle in itself. And considering what's gone on, and really proud of my family. And you are at the pinnacle of this. You're leading the pack. Thanks, Jeanette.
Oh, I'm getting accolades all over the place today. Yay.
Yep.
Sorry, the attaboys, I appreciate them, and yet they also make me feel like I don't know, it feels like it's pinging on an ego that I don't really enjoy its proximity to me. So I handle compliments really badly. Let's just say it like that.
Yeah, that goes with the territory for now.
So anyway, thank you for listening to me. This was very, very less scripted than what it normally is, and it was definitely a downer. But I know that there have been too many people that I've talked to that either feel like it was a mistake to have children, or that they're terrified that their children are growing up, or that two people I know have decided they are never going to have children because they can't make that promise. And I wish I could end it on a lighter note, but this is the reality. There isn't a silver lining to this of I've got the answer. If someone else has the answer, by all means, please share.
There's no good answer to this.
No.
There's no good answer. And all we can do is the very best we can. I know that my life would be very different if I didn't have kids. I love my kids dearly. And, it would be a different place if they were not part of my experience. But the fact that they're here, I can very well attest to the fact that we take a chance just by living. We take a chance by having kids that we're not going to be dashed upon the rocks if something happens to them.
Yeah.
And so it's all a risk. There's all a risk, but we're here to express the good stuff. And even from the ashes of what you described and the experience that you endured, you're rising up. You're offering something to the world and humanity, and you're setting a really, really good example, Trinette. Thank you very much. And with that, it's basically about time to wrap it up.
Yes, it is. I was getting really egocentric with this whole white box myself. Well, thank you, Roland, for helping me out here. This was a little more difficult, and I got a little more lost on this broadcast. So thank you, and thank you for watching. Thank you, and we'll see you guys next week. All right, everyone have a good week, and I appreciate you watching.